Hey everyone, it's Phil. How are you? Thank you so much for being here. We'll get going in just one moment. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen? So if we could hold off on the chat until we get to the question and answer, because it really does get a little unruly. So hold off till the end, and then we're going to answer everyone's questions. Glad everyone's able to make it here. Appreciate that. So let me get this. All right. So just to kind of give you a little background and we'll kind of get into this more. Many of you may already know this, but you know, um, back about a little less than a year ago, kind of the first shoe to drop was with what is called MLS PIN. That's what sort of led to. So before it used to be that we had to offer, at least $1 to the buyer's agent in the MLS. It couldn't be zero. Yeah, that was found to be illegal. MLS PIN lost, and then that was kind of the beginning of when we could put zero in those compensation fields. And then that kind of, took over. And then as we were getting closer, so there was a trial. Remax settles Anytime Realty, which is a Caldwell Banker, Sotheby's, Century 21. They settled. NAR and Keller Williams, Berkshire Hathaway kind of fought on. And then at the end of October of 2023, the jury ruled against NAR, Keller Williams, in a very large verdict, 1.87 million. Billion, 1.87 billion, and there were potentially treble damages. So it was, potentially going to be 5.4 billion. So, but at that time, NAR said, "Hey, we're going to keep going. We're gonna fight this." And then March 15th, they settled. And that settlement agreement is kind of what we're implementing now and what we're talking about tonight. So by August 17th, kind of the new operating procedures need to be adopted by all of us. So unfortunately, to make it a little bit harder for us, every MLS is kind of implementing this at a different time. But August 17th is kind of the drop dead date when we have to be compliant and operating under the new procedures. So there's some benefits to the new procedures. We're going to talk about those as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all bad. Actually, I think there'll be a benefit to this all in the end. Good real estate agents, knowledgeable real estate agents, professional agents, they're going to do just fine. Newer agents, again, maybe a little harder for them, but again, really who will suffer the most are agents that really don't do much of anything, meaning they don't do a lot of work for their client. They try to, get that commission, by doing the least amount possible. I think that they're going to suffer for sure. All right, so let's talk about what is happening. So again, just an overview. I'm sure we've all heard this. There's been plenty of emails now, but all the co-broke data is coming out. I saw a notice from one MLS. I'm not sure which one it was, but it's coming out tonight. So August 1st, no more co-broke compensation in that particular MLS. And again, but by August 17th, every MLS, there will be no co-broke information. Now, an important takeaway from that is you can't put it in the realtor remarks. It can't be anywhere. They're going to give you some leeway, right? But if you're a listing agent and you have, put in the realtor remarks, the public remarks, anything about, cooperating brokerage compensation, you're going to get fined. Right, they're going to fine you. So get that out, audit yourself. You don't want that in there. So even though it can't be in the MLS, sellers are still able to offer compensation. That hasn't been outlawed. There was talk of that. Thank God that didn't happen. That would have been really terrible. So again, it's optional, just like it's always been, but it's now a little more formal, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We may see some third-party websites develop with, co-broke information, but, something we're thinking about working on. We'll see where that goes. I did get solicited by a company that will do it for us. So there could be some, places where you can get that information. And again, once that data is removed, right, and it's happening now, right, and will be completely removed by August 17th, you need, if you're the buyer's agent, right, to have a commission agreement either with the listing brokerage or the seller, right? Think FSBO, right? We used to get a commission agreement from the FSBO to make sure we got paid as buyer's agent. Now we need to get that every single time. Again, whether it's from the listing brokerage or for the seller, right? So we need that, right? Now again, I mean, we're going to show the properties. I mean, if it's me, I'm not calling every, agent whose property I'm showing and asking, hey, are you offering commission? If my client likes it, they think they're going to put an offer in, certainly we're going to find out, if they are offering, compensation. So you're going to need to, enter into that, commission agreement with the listing brokerage or the seller as soon as that data is removed, right? That is the only way, right? The data is there, right? It says, oh, they're offering 2.5%. We print that out. We're good. We always get paid, but in the event we didn't, we have that. We bring it to the board. They're going to make sure we get paid. Once that's gone, we don't have that anymore. Then we're going to need, the, commission agreement from either the seller or the listing brokerage, right? And again, if you have a listing, right, you want to have me, we're getting 2.5%, right? We're offering 2.5%. You want your commission agreement signed by me so that when that buyer broker agent says, hey, are you offering commission? Yeah, here it is. Submit an offer, sign it. We're all good. All right. And then again, we're going to either need a buyer broker agreement, a property pre-touring agreement, or a showing agreement by August 17th. Again, potentially we would want that sooner, right? If that data, they didn't make this easy. Instead of just every MLS saying, hey, this date, it's all gone. No, they're all doing it differently, which, puts us in this kind of period where, some are, gone and others aren't. But basically, if that data is gone out of your MLS, right, as soon as that happens, you need that buyer broker agreement, property pre-touring agreement, or showing agreement. Why? Because now you don't know, am I going to get compensated? And then come to find out that property that your buyer likes, they're not offering compensation. You don't have a buyer broker agreement. Guess what? You're not going to get paid, right? So you're going to need that. And then if you're under agreement, as I said, if you're under agreement, prior to it being removed, you don't need the commission agreement or the buyer broker agreement. What's in the MLS where they're offering compensation, that suffices. All right, so this just popped up, I believe, yesterday. So it's the new listing agreement. And again, I'm a little perturbed, quite honestly, because, hey, this is July 31st. That settlement agreement got signed 4.5 months ago, and it's taken them all this time to generate this form. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about a form they still haven't generated, right? So they're not making it easy on us, but it is what it is. We're going to get through this and we're going to come out stronger. So this is the new listing agreement, right? It's pretty much very similar to the previous one, except that there are a couple of pretty significant changes. So Section 8, right, it stays the same. That's what is the seller paying us, right? This has always been a confusing point for many realtors, for many agents. The seller pays the brokerage. The seller pays Dalton Wade, and then Dalton Wade pays the buyer's agent. And that's how it still works, right? Sometimes we would get in compliance, 3% is what I'm charging the seller, and then I'm paying out 3%. If the seller ever called us out on that, that listing agent basically is working for zero, right? So the total commission goes to the brokerage, and then the brokerage pays the buyer broker out of that commission. So Section 8 stays the same. Let's just use 5%. We're charging 5%, 5% of the total, purchase price plus $395, $79, $495, $390 transaction fee. That's where that would go. Or if you're not doing a percent, you're doing a flat fee. That's going to go where it says or, and then the dollar amount. All right, Section 9 is new, right? Section 9 is where explicitly now they are telling the seller that regardless of who compensates the buyer broker, they are representing the buyer and working in their best interest. It emphasizes that the seller is not required to compensate the buyer's broker, although they may do so, right? And again, we've talked about this in some other trainings. Hey, the market's fair at best, right? I mean, there's a lot of listings, there's a lot of inventory, rates are still up there. Again, everyone I've talked with, I think most are going to be offering or, explaining to their selling client that, hey, it's in your best interest. Build it into the price, but we don't want to at all, kind of weaken demand for your home. And there's a lot of buyer agents out there. So we need to compensate them, right? So that's Section 9. It's going to tell them in more explicit terms, right? And then Section 10, right, is now where the co-broke information goes. So, and then again, the seller needs to choose if they're going to offer the buyer's broker a commission. If an option isn't checked, the default is no compensation will be offered. So those are the big changes to the listing agreement. That's pretty much it, right? So it's more explicit. I think it clarifies, because I would go on listing appointments and I would say, oh, we charge 5%. We're going to offer 2.5% to the buyer's agent. And then they would look and they go, oh, it looks like you're charging me 7.5%, right? So the form now, I believe, is a lot less confusing. It's a lot more transparent, right? But that's what we're going to be working with. And this needs to be implemented by August 17th. The forms are in Dotloop now. Probably start using it sooner rather than later. All right, so that's the new listing agreement. So again, the buyer broker agreements, let's spend a quick minute on that. So there's a showing agreement, there's a property pre-touring agreement, and then there's the buyer broker agreement. They're all available in Dotloop. After August 17th, we're not approving your file unless one of those three documents, if you're, the buyer's agent, has to be there, right? You need one of the forms to be in compliance. You can amend you can amend the forms, right, by completing an addendum, and remember, again, we've talked about this, as buyer agent now, you get sellers offering 3%, but your buyer broker touring agreement, showing agreement says you're to receive 2%. You only get 2%. You only get 2%. So again, maybe, you've done a great job for them. The seller's offering 3%. The buyer says, yeah, you're entitled to that 3%. You amend, right, through an addendum, that agreement. Then there's the seller compensation agreement, right? And seller brokerage compensation agreement. right? That is to make sure as buyer's agent, we get paid, right? And then a new one they just kind of sprung on us today is a compensation disclosure, right? So again, I'd asked the legal hotline a bunch of times. Maybe I didn't ask the question right. So again, our listing agreements, our buyer broker agreements that have already been executed are all still fine. But now what we need to do on top of that is we need, and they don't even have the form done yet, right? And this is something we pulled off the NAR website. So it's going to be finalized. They tell me by the end of the week. I'm like, there's no signature here. There's no signature box, right? So they did say, again, they don't really tell you until the form's out. My gut is that there will be a place where the seller and buyer, again, seller if it's a listing agreement. So if you have a listing agreement that was entered today and you're using the old form, by August 17th, you need to get your client to sign this disclosure, kind of explaining, the changes, right? Commissions are fully negotiable. So we have to kind of go back, right? I just thought it was going to be going forward, but someone brought this to my attention. I called the legal hotline. Again, they don't even have the form done yet here in Florida. It's coming shortly, they say. But again, we need, if we have a listing agreement signed, I call it the old listing agreement, then we need this compensation disclosure. If we have an old buyer broker agreement, right, not the new one, the old one, we need the compensation disclosure to be in compliance. All right, I want to talk a little bit about agency. So agency, it's always important, but maybe not as much so before, because how it worked before and still works the same, but before we're always assumed to be a transaction broker. So if you don't have something signed that says I'm a single agent or I have a non-brokerage relationship with the client, you are a transaction broker, right? On the listing side, you always got the listing agreement, right? You might have the listing agreement transaction broker. There's two different listing agreements, right? They look exactly the same, except one paragraph tells how we're representing the client, either as a single agent or as a transaction broker. Single agent is the highest form of representation, right? We're giving more. We're committing more to that seller or buyer. When we're a single agent, we're going to deal honestly and fairly. We're going to be loyal. Everything is kept confidential. We are obedient. They tell us to do something, we do it unless it's illegal, right? Full disclosure, accounting for all funds, skill, care, and diligent in the transaction, presenting all offers and counter offers in a timely manner, disclose all facts that materially affect the value of the property are not readily observable. Transaction broker. So now, right, when you're representing a buyer, before they didn't sign anything a lot of times, right? Now they're going to sign something every time, right? And they may sign a single agent form, single agent buyer form. And then I just went through what your duties are. If they sign the transaction broker one, many of the duties are the same: honesty and fairly, loyalty, limited confidentiality, right? So, if you're a single agent and they tell you, well, the reason we're selling is because we're getting divorced, right? And as a transaction broker, you could tell the other side, you may not do that, but you could, and you're not violating your duties to your client. Transaction broker, all that has to be kept confidential is what a buyer will pay and what a seller will accept, right? You submit an offer, buyer tells you, hey, I want to go in at 400, but I'm willing to go up to 420. I'm the listing agent, right? You send the offer over and I'm like, hey, it's Friday afternoon. Let's wrap this up. What's your client willing to pay? And you tell me 420. Oh, let's write it up at 420. That would be a problem. You spilled the beans. You can't do that. Again, accounting for all funds, that's the same. Skill, care, and diligence, that's the same. Presenting all offers, counter offers in a timely manner, right? So much of it is the same. It's the level of, there's no obedience, and then there's limited confidentiality. Those are the main differences between the two. When you're a single agent, you're a fiduciary. When you're a transaction broker, you're not. And then we have non-brokerage relationship, right? We see that, remember in the MLS, there'd be the three fields: single agent, transaction broker, non-brokerage relationship, right? And there usually be like 2.5. And then oftentimes someone with a non-brokerage relationship, they're going to maybe compensate you 1% or nothing. Because as a non-brokerage relation, you really don't do much, right? You're going to be honest. You're going to account for all funds. And if you know of any, defects, you're going to let them know. That's it, right? So you're not really doing too much. All right, here's what's important, right? Here's what's important and will become more important now, right? Because again, we have to have something signed on both sides, both the listing agreement and that. And when I say buyer broker agreement, I'm referring to three things: showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, or buyer broker agreement, right? So one of those three forms we have to have when we're working with a buyer, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Again, so there's some important differences that I want to make sure everyone understands. And again, so if you're the listing agent as a single agent and you have a buyer, right, you've got both sides. So again, before you have both sides, hopefully you transition to transaction broker because you can't be a single agent representing both sides. But now, right, if you have both sides, you have to get that buyer broker either showing agreement, pre-property touring agreement, or buyer broker agreement from the buyer. So every single time on the buy side, we have to have one of those three documents, even if you're the listing agent. And again, you can't be a single agent, so you'd have to transition to transaction broker, right? And obtain that buyer broker agreement or showing or property pre-touring agreement. So remember, transition to transaction broker. Got to do that now. All right. So important things to remember. Some important points, and then we'll get into the Q&A. All right. Listing agents. Get that compensation agreement signed now, right now. You want that signed now. So when that buyer puts in that offer and those compensation fields are gone, you've got it, right? And you can tell them, hey, we're offering this. Here it is. Send in the offer, sign it. We're all good, right? All right. The showing and property pre-touring agreement. I had someone email me today. He was using the showing agreement and he goes, oh, it seems like it's exclusive. No, the showing agreement and property pre-touring agreement are non-exclusive. And really, those agreements have minimal teeth. Minimal, right? What do I mean by that? So one of the good things they did, at least with the buyer broker agreement, was that now, similar to the listing agreement, if there's a dispute, right? If there's a dispute, meaning we didn't get paid, we can sue them and we can recover court costs and attorney fees. With the showing agreement and the property pre-touring agreement, that provision isn't there. So now we have a problem. We're not collecting. We're not getting paid by the buyer. And we really have no way to collect because let's say the commission is 10 grand. The legal costs to enforce it are probably going to be around that or more. So why do it? Doesn't make any business or economic sense. So what you want to be doing, right? The showing and property pre-touring agreement is to kind of like ease that buyer into you, right? To let them get to know you, to be compliant. But ultimately, you want to convert them to the buyer broker agreement or obtain it right out of the gate. Much stronger agreement, protects us. All right. Most MLSs will have a seller concession field. Now, I just got an email, I can't remember which MLS, saying they're not offering that. That's not happening in their MLS, right? So a lot of the MLSs will actually have a field now that says how much is the seller offering in concessions to the buyer. The buyer can use those seller concessions to pay the buyer agent commission, right? All good, but you cannot specifically state concessions to go to pay buyer agent, right? So, typically we write something like seller to pay $10,000 in closing costs, prepaids, non-allowables. Non-allowables might be some VA fees that are not allowed for the buyer to pay directly, so the seller can pay those. But now the seller can pay your commission, our commission, through that concession. Just can't specifically state that when we ask for it. All right, and we touched upon this again, for listings and buyer broker agreements entered into prior, to 8/17, or if you're using the old form, right, we need that compensation disclosure form. We have to let them know, right? We have this relationship with a seller, we have this relationship with a buyer, right? But that relationship we entered into before these changes, they don't know about these changes. We now have to tell them. Nothing has to change, right? The listing agreement doesn't change. The buyer broker agreement that we entered into doesn't change. All it is a disclosure, but we got to have it. And trust me, they're going to audit us on this. I know it. Maybe in the beginning there'll be some leniency, but the fines are large. Because what NAR wants is compliance. Because without compliance, we kind of gotta, we're gonna go back, into, worrying about, hey, are they gonna just outlaw sellers paying buyer broker commissions at all? That would be bad. So we don't want that. We want to be compliant. We should be compliant, and we can be compliant. All right. Touched upon this already, but if you're the listing agent and have both sides of the transaction, you need the buyer, either a broker agreement, showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement. You need something from them saying that they understand, right, how you're representing them, how you're working with them. It's got to be transaction broker, right? Because if you got both sides, we have to be a transaction broker. If you meet a buyer at an open house and you're not the listing agent, you need a buyer broker agreement. And when I say, buyer broker agreement, showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, if you're the one writing that offer. If you're ever writing an offer for a buyer, you need one of those forms to be compliant. So again, think of it like this. On the listing side, we always got a listing agreement. Couldn't put it in MLS without it. Now, when we work with buyers, we need a buyer agreement, whether it be a showing agreement, a property pre-touring agreement, or that buyer broker agreement. We want the buyer broker agreement, right? More teeth, enforceable, right? Where the showing agreement and property pre-touring agreement, not as much. Right? Again, I hit on this, but tomorrow's August 1st. So between now and August 17th, depending on your MLS, tomorrow you could wake up and that data is gone. But by August 17th, it will be gone everywhere. If you have a listing, you're the listing agent, you need to double check that anywhere on MLS, attachment, in the public remarks, the realtor remarks, anywhere there is no mention of co-broke compensation, you will be fined. And the fines are large. They're not fooling around. Once the data is removed, the mandatory buyer broker, property pre-touring, or showing agreement, trigger, and we'll need those. And then you need the compensation agreement with the seller or the seller's brokerage to make sure we get compensated. And then if you're the listing agent, get that compensation agreement signed now. There's no reason not to. NAR has a pretty good, website, frequently asked questions. I mean, a whole bunch of different situations. Check it out. Um, here's the URL. Take a look. Some good stuff there. I mean, we're covering most of it here and over the last, few sessions. All right, let me go back to stop sharing. Open up the chat. All right, I'm going to go slow. I'm going to repeat the question so everybody knows. All right, let's see. We got a few hellos. Everybody's saying hi. Good to see everybody here. Rakesh, how are you? Valerie. So I'm not going to go through and say hello to everybody. Stanley, good to see you. All right, let me scroll down. Can we talk about the new listing agreement? We did do that, Sergi. Did we answer your question? Sergi asked, can we talk about the new listing agreement? I think we touched upon that. He might have written that in, prior to me getting there. Let's see. Those are the changes there. Got an AI assistant. I love that. Yep. So Hector says, Fort Myers, yeah, that's Southwest Florida MLS, which covers, from Fort Myers down to Naples. It's going out tonight. Absolutely. So for Hector, everything kicks in starting tomorrow. Some of us would be a little longer. Stellar MLS is, I believe, August 6th, but by August 17th, everything is gone. Hey, Sharon, how are you? What has to be sent to the existing listings and existing buyer broker agreements we have is the disclosure, the compensation disclosure. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned, Florida Realtors doesn't have it done yet. Like, what are they doing over there, right? So it's not done. Should be out. They tell me in a couple days. The one on the NAR website, there's no signature. I'm like, I called them. I took a look at that. I'm like, called them up, and I'm like, and they told me like, several times you didn't need any, like, so maybe I didn't ask the question right. I don't know. But again, we will need that. We need to inform anybody we have a listing with, kind of, signed under the old rules. We need that commission disclosure or compensation disclosure. Hey, Jesus. Yeah. The this will be up live on the Dalton Wade training tab. Click it, click on demand videos, and then down to one-time webinars. It should be there by, probably, noon, 2 o'clock tomorrow. So that'll be there. Hey, Sandy. Sandy says Stellar MLS is eliminating compensation fields August 6th. That is true. Mel says, I just went to Broward, Palm Beach, St. Lucie class, and current listings will need a modification agreement, amend MLS for seller concession fields. Well, again, that's possible. I mean, that could be an amendment. Now they're offering it, and we're going to put that in. But again, really what we need on those older buyer broker agreements, right, and listing agreements is we need that compensation disclosure signed. So we got to tell people that we've previously kind of, so I said there's the old rules and then the new rules, right? So the old rules, if your listing, was the old agreement, the old listing agreement, the old buyer broker agreement, the old showing agreement, they just came out with a property pre-touring agreement. We need the commission disclosure. We have to wait till hopefully tomorrow or Friday to get the final form out of Florida Realtors. My gut tells me there will be a signature line there, but we don't know yet. Maybe it's just something you can email to your client. They don't have to sign it. That would be easy, but we'll see. Hey, Bill, do all these forms apply to commercial transaction and commercial agents? No, no, they don't. Um, so, Sharon says Stella already added. I'm not sure if she means the new listing agreement or that compensation agreement. Compensation disclosure could be there. I mean, let's see, it's coming soon. The transaction happens outside of MLS, does all this apply? Um, it does if it is, so here's my take right at the moment. Um, so if it's residential, absolutely. If it's land and it's zone residential, yes. If it's zone commercial, no. Right? If it's a commercial transaction, we don't need these disclosures. And then Liddy says, for so rentals, we do not need these disclosures for rentals. Now, again, what's being offered in the MLS um, for rentals is all going to be gone as well. Everything is coming out. So what you're going to need is that commission agreement, either from the landlord or the listing brokerage, right? So again, think of it like this. When it was in the MLS, that's what guaranteed we got paid as buyer's agent. Now it's not in there. So we needed that commission agreement from the seller, think FISBO, right? Or compensation agreement, right? Or commission agreement from the listing brokerage. Someone telling us they are going to pay us. Sergi says rentals have nothing to do with these documents for residential sales only. Yes. Um, Richard says, do you need all three agreements or only one? You only need one, right? Thank you, Sergey. One of the three, right? You only need one, right? And again, showing agreement, pretty weak, right? Non-exclusive, meaning a buyer could sign 4 showing agreements with 4 different agents. You really don't have much. All you have is your compliant, but you don't have really any guarantee, right? With the showing agreement or the property pre-touring agreement, get to know them, have them like you, demonstrate your value, and then convert them over to that buyer broker agreement, which has some teeth, right? And or if you're, able to get that buyer broker agreement, maybe it's a referral, you worked with a client, they're recommending you to their brother, they tell them you're awesome. You can probably go right to the buyer broker agreement with that. You're meeting somebody online, right? A Zillow lead, OpCity, what have you. Probably need to start with maybe one of those other 2 agreements that are, a little less onerous for the buyer. Laura says, I just put 2 buyers under contract and the MLS shows what I am receiving. Do I still need to sign the seller to broker agreement showing that percentage now? No, nope, you don't. It's so basically, Hector, Hector's down there in Fort Myers. So in Fort Myers, that MLS, it's coming out tonight. Tomorrow, when he logs in, there is no more commission data in the MLS for him. So if Hector puts a buyer under agreement tomorrow, he needs the buyer broker agreement and he needs the commission agreement. But eventually, by August 17th, everyone will need it. Exactly, Liddy. Yep. So you're gonna put in there just like you do now what we're offering. Can't quite remember, where you are, but if you're in South Florida, so in South Florida, rentals work differently than everywhere else in Florida. So in South Florida, the 2 agents, the one who has the listing and the one who brings the tenant, they split the commission. So you got a $3,000 rental, each agent gets $1,500. You can make some money with rentals in South Florida, right? So that would work the same, right? But for the 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 agent working with the tenant, right? When they look, they're not going to see what you're offering. So they may call you, they may ask you, right? You're going to have, if we have the, exclusive right to lease, and the landlord has said, hey, we're going to pay you 1 month's rent, which is $3,000, and then you say, okay, I want to split that with the buyer's agent, the tenant's agent, right? Then you're going to get them to sign, or you're going to have me sign a compensation agreement, right? Saying we're offering $1,500. So when the agent brings the tenant, you give them that, and that way they know they're going to get paid. All is good. Hey, Joe, how are you? Absolutely. Can we verbally and an advertisement state we offer buyer commission? 100%. You can create a video, right? You can put it on Facebook. You can put it anywhere else. The only place it can't be is in the MLS, unfortunately. But we're still able to offer. We can let people know we're offering. We just can't do that through the MLS. All right. Hi, Phil, is the new law about commission apply for commercial, just residential? We touched upon that, but good to kind of repeat it. Hey, Alicia, I would have to check on that. She's asking, future home realty, you will be implementing verbiage to the point of putting a lien on the buyer should they not pay at closing. What is your stand? Just getting this question now, so I don't have a stance. I mean, I think here's the thing. So, we could do that. I don't know what everybody thinks, but again, like, to me, that makes it harder, right? That makes it harder to get somebody to sign, right? So now, again, showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, there's nothing in there, right? Again, one of the things I don't like doing is mucking around with the forms, right? Because then, we can't really talk to the legal hotline about it, right? So I like to use those Florida forms. So again, I mean, I don't know the difference between a lien and a judgment. I'll find out. We'll get back to you on that. I'm not sure. If we are the listing agent, we need a seller's commission agreement to be able to give to the buyer's agent. And as a buyer's agent, we need a showing agreement. Hey, Antoinette. Yep. I mean, you got it 90%. I think yeah. So, yep. If we are the listing agent, we need seller commission agreement. Absolutely. Well, you don't need a seller commission agreement if on the listing agreement, the seller has said they are offering compensation. Then I can sign. I can sign. So there's two commission agreements, one signed by the seller, one signed by the listing brokerage, right? So in either work, right? So again, not to have to bother the seller, right? Then you just, produce the one that is, by the brokerage. We agree to that. And then we compensate them. And then you're going to give that to the buyer's agent, and then they're going to have their brokerage sign it, and we're all good. And as buyer's agent, we need a showing agreement or buyer broker agreement. Also, there's the property pre-touring agreement. So one of those three agreements is needed. And then you need the you need the commission agreement, either signed by the seller or signed by the listing brokerage, right? Because now, again, data in MLS, that's how we knew we got paid. We always got paid. Not going to be there anymore. So now we need that commission agreement. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, I like the arbitration option. I mean, sometimes it's better. than having to go to court. It tends to be a little quicker, a little cheaper. Again, you know, again, I mean, most times it's not going to be an issue, right? I mean, I don't think once ever on the listing agreement, thousands and thousands and thousands that we have ever gone to arbitration with anybody ever. Just doesn't happen. I think on the buyer side, maybe it's a little higher probability. So meaning that we're going to have a problem and we're going to and what's the problem? The problem is we didn't get paid and we should have got paid. Hey, Steve, good question. Does a buyer broker agreement create an exclusive relationship with a buyer, or can a buyer sign multiple buyer broker agreements with multiple agents? So again, there's three things that keep us in compliance: showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement. Those are non-exclusive, right? A buyer can sign multiple agreements, right? They still may owe us a commission, but then collecting the commission becomes difficult. The buyer broker agreement is exclusive, right? And again, you as an agent, when you start to work with a buyer, now probably becomes more important than ever to find out, hey, have you signed anything with anybody? What did you sign? If they signed a showing agreement or property, pre-touring agreement, we can work with them. If they signed a buyer broker agreement, it's hands off. Stan says, just heard that EXP will not offer any commission to buyer's agents on their listings. This is their company-wide protocol. Too bad. That's a terrible policy. That's something I totally disagree with. I don't know whether they're trying to be greedy and get both sides. I don't understand it, but I think they're going to have, again, think of the market we're in. I mean, there's an incredible number of listings. I think that's a terrible policy, but obviously that's their choice. Don't know. I mean, how would you guys feel if I said to you, hey, we cannot, like, unilaterally, we're not offering, like, I don't believe in that. I mean, again, like, you as an agent, you want to recommend to your client not to offer compensation, you can do that. But I am not going to create a policy across the board that says to every Dalton Wade agent, it's up to you. And I think that's a terrible policy on their part. I'd be surprised they don't end up changing that. Hey, AJ, how are you? AJ asks, this also applies for new construction. Absolutely. 100%. Now, again, the problem on new construction, I think, we talked a little bit about this. Make sure we mention it again. A lot of times, new construction bonuses, right? Bonuses. So again, the most you can receive as buyer's agent is what is on either that showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, or listing agreement, right? You are not able to get more. So, you have a 2.5% buyer broker agreement. Lennar's offering 2.5% plus 5,000. You don't get the 5,000. Now, the only way to get the 5,000 would be to sign an amendment, changing what your compensation is. Dotloop has been updated with the new forms. I mean, we're checking on that daily. Most are there. I can't remember. There might have been one missing. We checked, but they're mostly there. If not, we're putting them in ourselves. But they all will be there, and very, very shortly if they're not there now. But yeah, they're right on top of it. So all good there. Good question, Antoinette. As listing agent, do we need to ask the buyer agent for the compensation agreement they have with the buyer? So I think what you're referring to is the buyer broker agreement, showing agreement, or property pre-touring agreement. They don't have to give us that. They are not required to give us that. They might, but they're not required. So then that begs the question, well, hey, I'm offering 2.5% as the listing agent. I guess we're going to give you 2.5%. If we think, it seems difficult to audit, like how are we going to know that that didn't say 2% and now we've overpaid them? I don't know. We can ask. I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking, but we don't have to give them, nor are we going to give them. Again, it's up to you. If you feel it's good, you want to give that listing agent your buyer broker agreement, I'm good with that. But if you don't want to, I'm good with that as well. Rakesh asks, does the buyer pay the commission to the title company at the time of closing and then we get paid with a CDA? Absolutely. Absolutely. That is definitely how it should work. Hopefully that is how it works. The only problem potentially is if the buyer doesn't have the money. And then we have a problem, we have to see, but that would be that, again, we would want that paid, through the title company, all disclosed, everybody sees it. Mel asks, what time frame do you recommend for the seller to buyer broker agreement? Meaning, I'm not quite sure on that, Mel, what you're asking. So maybe type that in again, clarify that a bit. Hey, Mike, I already have a third-party MLS. Will I have the same restrictions to your knowledge? I'm not sure what a third-party MLS is. Maybe you can, type that in below, and when I get there, I'll see if I can answer it better. Not sure what that is. Hey, Melissa, can we advise the seller is willing to comp the buyer's agent if it is only public marketing? Absolutely. So again, we hit upon this before. We'll touch upon it again. You can promote, that you're offering compensation to the buyer's agent everywhere except in the MLS. And in the MLS, it can be nowhere. It can't be in the realtor remarks. It can't be an attachment, right? Nowhere. You'll get fined. Stan says, he's talking to Sergey. I spoke to Stellar MLS. Rentals do not need a buyer broker. That is true, but you still cannot mention any commission or compensation on the MLS anywhere. Anywhere. That is correct, no matter what it is. Is listing agent required? Hey, Joe, is listing agent required to ask for the showing agent for a buyer broker showing? Yeah, I mean, I think you would ask because you want to know, like, and this again kind of opens up an interesting question. Let's say your seller has agreed to offer 5%, 2.5% to you, 2.5% to the buyer's agent, right? And then they send over the buyer broker agreement and they're only getting 2%, then we have to do a listing modification, right? Because now, right, we have to modify the listing agreement because instead of it being 2.5%, 2.5%, it's now maybe 3% or 2.5%. Again, Alicia, we touched upon this. I think, implementing, Bob is very conservative over there in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that, putting a lien on the buyer's property, and they've agreed to that. I mean, I think again, certainly it's possible. Have to think about it, as I mentioned. To me, like, you're a buyer and you have a choice of working with Dalton Wade or FHR, and FHR tells you I'm going to put a lien on your house, who are you going to work with? I don't know. I mean, again, I think sometimes we have to see. I mean, again, all of this, I don't want to say it's subject to change because a lot of it is ironclad, hard and fast. But some of it, I mean, as we get into this, we're going to learn a lot, and we may need to tweak some things here and there. Hey, Shelley, all we need to represent a buyer is the buyer agency agreement, correct? Yes and no. So yes, if you have the buyer, broker agreement, you're good. But you can have a showing agreement. You can have a property pre-touring agreement. If you think of the concept, right, of what they're trying to do here, they're trying to educate the buyer. Who pays, right? How does this work? A lot of times buyers were in the dark, didn't know because they never were told. Now they're explicitly told through one of those three agreements. So again, showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, they're something. We're compliant, but you have nothing. You have nothing. You have a non-enforceable, non-exclusive agreement. I don't want to take somebody out and spend, 6 days, taking them around. And then their father says, hey, you need to work with my agent, and they dump you, and they can. So again, use those showing agreement, use that property pre-touring agreement. Really, again, as I said, maybe with internet leads, people you don't know, people you're just meeting for the first time. But again, try to move them to a buyer broker agreement. It has a lot more protection. Not sure. Can we pre-fill the buyer broker document and upload it as an attachment in the MLS? Like that commission agreement, I think that's what you're referring to, Joe. I don't believe that can go in the MLS. The commission agreement is either signed by me or signed by the seller. I know that can't be in the MLS. But the buyers are going to ask you. They'll say, "Oh, what are you offering? Oh, here it is. I got it. Here it is. I'm ahead of you. I'm on top of it. I'm not scrambling around. I can send it right over you. Hey, submit that offer." So for rentals, again, where can we offer compensation for the other brokerage? Anywhere but on MLS, Facebook, Craigslist, anywhere. Rent stop, anywhere but the MLS. If you want to go into Zillow and edit Zillow in your listing and put that in there, I think you're good. Yep, Stellar has added the concession boxes. Yep, they're coming in. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean, but again, it's something, where the seller can, explicitly tell. A lot of times you might see it in the realtor marks. Now there's a field, but again, not every MLS, I just don't remember which one it was. Not every MLS is going to have this, but Stellar will. So that's good. Hey, Kelly, is Dalton Wade going to provide a form letter to us to send to all our listings along with the new form addenda? Um, Probably not, but I'm putting everybody on notice that you need to get that. I mean, there's going to be a form through Florida Realtors. That's the one we're going to use. I mean, we kind of went through it. It's just a very simple disclosure for all our old listings, right? You got old, stuff that was executed either a listing agreement or a buyer broker agreement prior to the new forms being used. Then we need that commission disclosure. There will be a form shortly. Liddy's asking, the landlord needs to sign compensation disclosure, either the landlord or me, right? If we have a listing, excuse me, an exclusive right to lease, right? And it says, hey, we're getting $3,000 and that's to be divided. And then out of that $3,000, we are paying $1,500. Then I can sign and say, hey, Mr. Buyer agent bringing a tenant, we are offering $1,500. Here it is. Hey, Diane, if the buyer's looking at a single family and condos, villas, do I need to know? One covers all. One, either a showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, buyer broker agreement. It covers us, for all types of residential property. I'm gonna say it one more time, right? Showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement. Not a lot there. Not a lot there. So you have a condo listing right now. What you need, Diane, are two things. Once that commission compensation disclosure comes out from Florida Realtors, you're going to need your seller to sign that, right? And then you're going to also have me sign, because I'm sure you're offering some compensation to the buyer's agent. You're going to need for me to sign the compensation agreement form, so that when a buyer says, hey, my client likes it, we're going to put an offer in. Are you offering any compensation? Because they're not going to be able to see it on the MLS, right? Oh, here it is. Send them the form. You're done. You can sign them, Laura. You can sign them. Absolutely. Yep, you guys can sign them. Um, so Diane, I think again, and this is a good question. The way to think about this as it relates to the buyer broker agreement, you want something broad, meaning, oh, what wouldn't be broad? Um, um, my agreement with you is to show you villas, but then I don't really have an agreement with you to show you a single family home or a condo. That probably isn't good. I have an agreement with a buyer to show them properties in, you know, Manatee County, but then they want to look in St. Pete or Pinellas. You're not covered. So you want something broad, something that says, pretty much every type of residential property throughout the state of Florida. I mean, that would be to the extreme, but that's kind of what you want. All right, Shelley asks, to make an offer as a buyer's agent, we need to present the compensation disclosure before the offer. Not that you need to present it, you need to have it, right? You need to have it. You don't want to be sending in an offer with a compensation agreement, because what if they sign the offer and then they don't sign the compensation agreement? You're out of luck. So you want, hey, do you have, again, hopefully most listing agents are going to be on top of this. They're going to be on top of their game. They're going to have that. Hey, I'm getting ready to submit an offer. How much are you offering to compensate me? Oh, 2.5%. Oh, can you send me over, the commission agreement? They send it over. You got it. I sign it. Now it's, in force. And you send in the offer. Hey, Glenda, how are you? Good question. Does this apply to vacant land? I did call the legal hotline because I knew someone would ask that. This is what they told me. They said it applies if it's residential, if it's zone residential, It does. If it is zone commercial, it doesn't. Sergi asks, if a buyer calls me on my listing and wants me to show it, do I still need to have them sign a BBA? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So, yep, absolutely. Now, again, you might just sign a showing agreement just to show them that your house, or maybe, your Sergi will do this because he's awesome, right? Maybe you get a buyer broker agreement, right? You got a new buyer. But every transaction, say this again, every transaction, we need a buyer broker agreement. And again, when I say buyer broker agreement is synonymous, we need one of those three things: showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, or the full-blown buyer broker agreement. All right, move this thing here a bit. All right, onward. Let's see. We have this. Let's see. Hey, Rhonda, let's see. If the seller does not agree to pay buyer agent commission, how do we explain the compensation to the buyer? Well, there is no compensation. So again, maybe it's through a seller concession. Maybe we can be paid that way, right? Maybe you can, then if the seller's not offering, your buyer needs to pay you. But maybe your buyer doesn't want to pay you or can't pay you, then probably that's not the right house for them, right? That's not the right house for them because they're going to have to come out of pocket to pay you, and maybe they can't. But again, most sellers, at least in the market we're in, are going to be offering compensation. I think it'll be rare, but I mean, Stan mentioned EXP. I don't know. I'm not sure why they would do that. I'll look into that. Hey, Jody, how are you? Hey, Jody, Anthony called me today and said you're an awesome agent. Usually when I see that, support number, they're transferring me a call. I cringe because I know usually it's a problem, but not this time. It was a very happy client. So great job on that. All right. So back to your question. So when we're showing a place, should we call the listing agent to see what the comp will be before we do a buyer broker agreement, or will we negotiate percentages? All right. So I think you got to think of it a little differently, right? The first thing you're getting is the buyer broker agreement. Remember, that's one of the three agreements. You got to have that. Can't work with somebody without it. Can't show them a place without it. Then you get it, you take them around, and at least what I would be doing, I'm not calling every listing agent and asking if they're paying compensation because, I mean, Phil had bad luck, right? When he would work with buyers, I would show him 40 places and maybe they'd make an offer. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you know what I mean, right? They can take you, right? You can show them a lot of places before they pull the trigger. And then you're like, are they ever going to make an offer? So my tact, again, I mean, you can certainly do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking, but I think it becomes a lot of work. So I would just find out on the ones that they're ready to, put an offer in on. Well, hey, Hector, we're glad the one sold and one is still active. So on the one that's still active, right, that is coming out tomorrow. What you're going to need is two things. From the seller, you're going to give them that compensation disclosure, commission disclosure, right? The new, it's just a disclosure. It just tells them, hey, because of this settlement, commissions are negotiable. It's very tame, but we need that, right? And then you're going to need, the commission agreement signed by either you or me, right? So when, the buyer puts in the offer, you've got here it is. Here's what we're offering, right? In writing, signed. Have your broker sign it. It's all good. Hey, Susan, Fort Myers has already removed the commission. Right, they're gone. It's happening. Naples and Fort Myers, Southwest Florida, it's already happening. Stan says, how do you handle MLS fees and transaction fees? Well, you handle them by being explicit, right? So if you look on the listing agreement, it says 3% plus, right? So if you're charging your seller, a transaction fee, it's 3% plus whatever that transaction fee is, right? All disclosed, all good. And if you're working with a buyer, it works the same way. I'm charging them 2% or 2.5% or 3% plus 390. Think of the buyer, right? Like, again, we have listing agreements. Now we have buyer broker agreements. So we have agreements on both sides. Hey, Mark. Mark says, I have a listing at this moment, and with GTAR starting August 6th, it's stellar MLS. GTAR's a part of that. I will need a compensation agreement signed by you, Phil. Yes, you will, right? Stating how much in that listing agreement we are offering, right? So that would match up. And yeah, you will need that. We will need that signed. And then you will also need a compensation disclosure, right? Because you already have the listing, right? So you're going to let that seller know, hey, there's been some changes. I'm giving you this disclosure. You get them to sign it, and then we're all good. All right, Kirsten. Kirsten's got a tough question here for Phil. Can I post a link in the MLS that sends you to a property page with the buyer's agent commission? My gut is no, no. I mean, but I will check on that, but I am fairly certain that's a no. Again, they don't want anything, but I'm going to ask. That's a great question, but my gut tells me they're going to tell me no, but we'll have to be back to you on that one. Hey, Linda Sue, how are you? Thank you, Phil, for the invite. I have 4 buyers, all in the beginning stages. I'm in West Palm Beach. All right. So, I mean, again, do you have a buyer broker agreement signed? Do you have a property pre-touring agreement signed or a showing agreement signed? If you don't, then you're fine up until they pull the data out of Beach's MLS, right? Once that, compensation fields are gone, then you need one of those 3 agreements, or you should not be showing them any properties. And you want that because, again, think of it like this, right? You're showing them, they want to make an offer, they love this house, and then come to find out that house isn't offering you any compensation. And now you don't have a buyer broker agreement. You are out of luck. Got to protect yourself. Stan says, can I get a rider? You should see Stan's open houses. Anybody want to learn how to do an open house? Go to one of Stan's. It's like a show. It's incredible. But anyways, can I get a rider on my signs? Yeah, absolutely. Buyer, brokers, welcome. Offering buyer compensate, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, just can't be in the MLS. All right, Diane. Diane says, if you have a 3% exclusive buyer, but the seller EXP agent says we are offering nothing to the buyer agent, how would the buyer agent continue to write the deal? I guess you have the buyer pay, but where would that be communicated in the contract? Is there legal language for us to use? You have the buyer broker agreement. You have the buyer broker agreement, right? And you've got that new buyer broker agreement that basically says they owe, and if they don't owe, we can enforce it. It's got some teeth, right? So that's all you need. But obviously, you're gonna speak to your client. This isn't in a vacuum. You're gonna speak to them, and you're gonna say, "Hey, look, I know you like this house, but hey, it's 500 grand, and you're gonna owe me $15,000. That's gonna come out of your pocket. Are you sure this is the house for you? Because there might be another house that you like almost as much where they're gonna compensate me. What do you want to do?" Ambria says, what if the selling brokerage, and I think what she means is the listing brokerage, right? So typically the selling brokerage is the buyer's brokerage, like there's the listing, right? And then the selling brokerage is the buyer's broker. So, but I'm going to assume you mean listing. What if the listing brokerage still refuses to compensate even with said forms in place? What would prevent or protect the buyer's agent? Here's what we are going to take them to the board and they're going to lose. That's what's going to protect us. That's what's awesome about being a realtor. I mean, there are a lot of things we don't like, and I'm first to admit that, but there are some good things, and that's one of them. One of them is we always get paid, right? And again, they'll kick them out. They'll shut them right down. And if that didn't work, we could potentially take them to court, but they'll pay, right? Because no one's going to lose their right to be part of MLS and get, kind of kicked out of the system. So again, it's no different than it is now, right? If they didn't pay or there's a dispute, it's the same. Someone at the board is going to arbitrate that. And again, if we have all our documentation, we have that signed, commission agreement from the listing brokerage, they're going to rule in our favor. Everything is going to be available in Dotloop, right, to help us remember. And if something is missing, you'll get a note back from compliance telling you what we need. For our listings, are we having the seller pay commission instead of you paying them? It really depends. So if the listing agreement is written, remember what we talked about, Section 8, we use 5 and 2.5, right? Section 8 says Dalton Wade is getting 5%. And then in Section 10, it says we are offering 2.5% to the buyer's agent. Then we can sign it. I can sign it, right? We're all good. Now let's say a different example. Let's say you got that listing and you got it for 3%, 2.5%, but you're not offering any compensation to the buyer's agent, right? And then the buyer comes and says, "Oh, here's this awesome offer, but if we put that in, and they kind of tell you what the number is, are you willing to pay commission?" Then you would have the seller sign it. Then you would have the seller sign it because we are only getting paid 3% or 2.5%. So we're not getting paid. So we can't really then pay the buyer's agent. Ellie says, please double check with your preferred lender to gain your funds from a buyer who needs help with his or her funds. FAH has approved to roll realtor commissions into loan if feasible for the buyer, plus ask the seller. Haven't heard that, but I will certainly, check around and see if that's possible. I mean, it can be rolled into their loan through the seller concession, right? I mean, that's basically, the buyer, seller concession often is a way for, the buyer to pay less in closing costs, right? If you think of our commission maybe as a closing cost, it can pay us. So the concession works. Stan says you will pre-sign the buyer broker agreement and compensation agreements in advance Nope. So Stan, the buyer broker agreement, again, three ways that works: showing agreement, property pre-touring agreement, buyer broker agreement. Those all make us compliant. But the compensation agreement is from the listing agent once you have found a property, right? Oh, we like this. Oh, we're gonna make an offer. And then to make sure, the buyer's not going to have to pay you. You're going to get that commission agreement from either the listing brokerage or from the seller. Hey, Kim, what if a buyer lies to you about signing any previous agreement? Um, that's a great question. So again, if they lie to you and what you get them to sign is a showing agreement or a property pre-touring agreement, um, again, we could try to enforce it, but it's at the end of the day, it's not worth it. At the end of the day, the cost to enforce it exceeds in almost all cases what our commission is. So why do that? Now, again, if they lied to you and you have a buyer broker agreement, we can sue them. And then if we prevail, we will get our costs, attorney fees, court costs. The buyer's on the hook for that. I agree. I don't know if that one will last. That's an interesting one. Again, I mean, I think one of the good things about Dalton Wade, you guys have some flexibility. I would never do that. I don't know what they're thinking. Maybe they're thinking, I don't know, maybe they think they're going to get the buyer. I don't know. It's not good. We'll see how that one goes. Hey, Beth. Beth says I was on a call with CEO of EXP today. They are being very careful with wording because sharing and cooperation is what got us into this mess. It's semantics and still plan to work with buyer agents. Yeah, I mean, again, hard to know. We will find out. Obviously, they have a number of listings, so we'll see what happens on that front. Hopefully, that's again, I think it would be difficult, right? I mean, you go on a listing appointment and you're telling the seller that you're not offering it. What if the seller wants to offer compensation? What if the seller knows that's in their best interest to do that? So it's a bit odd, but we'll see. Do we just make a dot loop for each client, one loop for all the BBAs? So again, here's what we're going to do. So again, you could do that, but more a better way, quite honestly, and how we're going to actually review this from a compliance perspective is that you submit the offer, right? You have a signed, executed offer as a buyer's agent. Dalton Wade compliance needs a showing agreement, a property pre-touring agreement, or a buyer broker agreement, or we can't pay you without one of those because we are not in compliance. And then we need a commission agreement. Who's paying us? Either from the brokerage or from the seller. Richard asks, how many months is the buyer broker agreement? Well, it could be for a year, it could be for a week. It's all negotiable, right? It's all negotiable. So again, there's no set amount of time. Certainly, the longer you have it for, the better, right? It shows commitment, and obviously, you're going to work hard. So again, we do have to work hard because one of the things Phil is fearful of is that it's going to get complaints. We're going to get buyer calling us saying, because now, like if an agent isn't doing a good job, the buyer just finds somebody else. But now there's an enforceable contract, so got to do a good job. You don't want them calling me and saying, "Oh, my agent, I haven't heard from them in a week," right? Don't want that. Hey Dana, is Dalton Wade providing addendum verbiage to ensure we are covered? I have no idea exactly what you're talking about. Addendum to what? Addendum to the buyer broker agreement, addendum to the listing agreement, addendum to the compensate, right? There's a lot of agreements, right? So, depending on which one it is, we can certainly give you some verbiage. Yeah, EXP. I mean, I'm not sure it's so much EXP, but it could be. But I mean, I know a lot. I mean, there's a lot of and there's a lot of agents, and not in general, that they're all about themselves, and we all want to make money. We're not doing this. We're not a charity organization, right? We want to make money, but like how we make it, what we provide. But there are certain agents, they just go for the jugular on the client, and I think a lot of times, that's one of the reasons where maybe that we've come to this where now there's a need for more disclosure. So again, my take on it all is that there were a lot of little things that NAR kind of did through their policies that at the end of the day stifled competition. um, and obviously that was true because if it was, we wouldn't be here, right? They lost for a reason. Caldwell Banker, um, all of them, they settled. Why? Because they had to. They lost. And they were very cocky about it, you know. So, anyways, as I said, I think it was a lot of little things that added up to problems. I mean, Kelly says buyer broker has a section for rentals. There's no harm, right? There's no harm in having the buyer broker agreement, right? There's no harm, even for rentals. It's not required, but it's better to have it. Like we've all had clients, at least I did, not many because I'm awesome, but I did have some that ditched me, right? They ditch you. Can't do that now. Can ditch you with the showing agreement, can ditch you with that property pre-touring agreement. Need that buyer broker agreement to really have some protection. All right, Christine, implement new listing agreement formed by August 17th. Yep. Obtain signed commission disclosure forms for absolutely. For existing listings, existing agreements, meaning listings and any buyer broker agreements. Ensure one of the requirement. I wonder if Christine is the AI assistant because they're pretty good. Ensure one of the required buyer agreements is signed for each buyer. Absolutely. Good job. All right, Dan, how are you, Dan, down in Sarasota on open houses? No forms needed to be signed to enter the open house. That is correct. Only time we need something touring the open house to sign a buyer broker agreement is when we help them write an offer on the home or as we take them to another home. Correct. Yes, that is correct. So again, if you are writing, think of every single transaction now, right? Everyone, and I'm using now as August 17th on, we need one of those three agreements. Always, every time, 100%. But yes, somebody can enter an open house without an agreement. Let's see, when I have a buyer broker agreement signed that expires and a buyer buys a home, I showed them, does procuring costs still apply? That's a good question. So on that one, it probably would if you showed them the house. Now, again, if you showed them a house and it was 3 weeks and then they went back to it and then they wrote an offer, procuring cause is kind of the continual sequence of events, right? So we have a few procuring cause issues now, right? Agent shows, house, writes an offer, gets ready to write an offer, and then buyer ditches them. Now we find out the house has been sold, right? So in that case, again, we took it a little further. We just didn't show them the house. We were ready, she ran comps, she did more, she sent over the offer, they didn't sign it. Then a day later, they go back to whoever their realtor is, and then they write the offer. But if you just showed somebody a house, maybe, but that's a harder one. That's a harder one. But you do have a protection period. You do have a protection period with that buyer, right? And again, I can double check with a listing agreement if it's, if they sign another buyer broker agreement with a different agent, I believe that protection period would be over. It's again, like the example would be you showed them a house and then they contacted the listing agent directly, you would still be protected. Sandy says, see article EXP is pushing sellers to have concessions for buyers agents. Hey, the bottom line is, if you're a buyer's agent and you're out there working, you need to be compensated. So whether it's through, them offering, a commission to you or through a seller concession, either or works. All right. Bill says, here's an interesting one. A commercial agent lists a property assemblage, half his own commercial, half residential. The listing contract and the listing in MLS is complete and was done as one listing. What's your take on this commission agreement? Yeah, I think again, it's the safer route is always to have the buyer broker agreement, especially with commercial, right? Because, much of this is going to be like commercial now, right? With commercial, sometimes the seller doesn't pay. And you have to get, right, your compensation from the buyer of that commercial property. This is going to become very similar to that. Again, we're somewhat lucky that this is all happening in maybe a little bit of a slower market. So again, we'll have to see, how many folks, I think you can get a good read on this by just looking at MLS now and seeing how many listings have zero. I mean, I haven't looked lately, but the last time I did it was very, very few. So here's my takeaway on that, Steve. In the Real Remark session, can we see my website? I think anywhere in Stellar, any link in any MLS that then takes somebody to a commission, where they can find the commission data is probably against the spirit of what's happening. And I don't think that's going to work. Now, if, someone mentioned a sign writer, putting it on Facebook, maybe you go into Zillow and you edit the listing and you put it in there. Same with Realtor, like what you're offering, right? That's all fine. It just can't be anywhere in the MLS. My understanding, the seller to broker agreement would be to give the buyer's realtor, when you anticipate or get an offer and the seller is bound to give that commission for whatever time is in the agreement, say 30 days. In other words, the seller cannot change the commission amount for that broker for that time frame. So I'm not sure on that, Mel. I mean, again, think of it like you have the listing agreement, and the listing agreement says, hey, this is what they're offering, right? And then that's going to be up until the expiration of the listing, right? So you're offering compensation to the buyer for that time unless otherwise modified. If the seller, through the listing agreement isn't offering any compensation, maybe they're compensating through that, you know, concession field. That seems cumbersome to me, but possible. But again, if the buyer agent, negotiated, even though on the listing agreement it's not there, right? And the seller says, yes, I will pay you, then you need the commission agreement from the seller. Hey, Lisa, that's a good question. Would the listing agent get the additional compensation if the buyer agreement is less than offered by the seller? Would the listing agent get the additional fee? I think we touched upon this, but this is a good one. So I'm going to answer it again. So again, let's go through an example. So 5%, 2.5, 2.5. And then you call and they put an offer in, or they're asking you what you're going to pay, and you tell them 2.5%, and you say, well, can I see your buyer broker agreement? And they tell you no. You have to pay them the 2.5%. Now, again, if you thought, that was, they did that, illegally or incorrectly, or that's not what's really there, you'd have to file a complaint with either the MLS or the board, and then I'm sure they would be able to get that agreement. Now, let's take it a step further, and they do give it to you, and it's 2%, right? What you need then is a listing modification, right? A listing modification, because again, 5%, 2.5, 5% to the listing brokerage, 2.5% to the buyer's agent. But now the buyer agent is only getting 2%. So that listing agreement needs to be modified. Either now it would say 5%, 2%, right? 5% to Dalton Wade, 2% to, buyer broker, or 4.5%, 2%. So you're still getting your 2.5%. But that would be a discussion. Maybe they say, wow, you sold this in a week. You're awesome. I can't believe how good a job you did. Hey, you're going to get 3%. But you do have to mention it to them. Hey, Karen, how are you? Can the buyer's offer include, in additional terms, a negotiation for compensation or concession to them for the seller? All right, so that's a really good question. So in the additional terms, you cannot be making that offer contingent on you getting paid. So it can't be something like this, this offer is null and void unless seller pays 2.5%. That would be a violation, an ethics violation, so you can't do that. You could write, seller to pay $10,000 in, buyer's closing costs, prepaids, non-allowables, and then the buyer can allocate, right? Say the commission is 8,000, they can allocate 8,000 of that 10,000 to your commission. If somehow they changed their mind and allocated it somewhere else, well, you got the buyer broker agreement. So you're covered. Shelley says, so we could charge just to show properties and charge them with a showing of property or pre-touring. When you say charge them, I mean, you're thinking that you are going to get some compensation for showing them a property. again, if there's any compensation, it has to go to Dalton Wade and then we pay you. I think that's going to be a difficult one. I mean, to sell that someone, you're going to take them around and they're going to pay you to do that. I mean, you can try. I mean, certainly, that would be some type of retainer, some type of agreement that they're going to pay you, whether they buy a property for you or not. Seems like a distant bridge. That would not be how I would be approaching this. I don't think that. I think you'll lose clients that way. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you being here. See, as a broker to resell mobile homes on leased land on residential homes, I use a third-party MLS company for marketing nationwide, such as Zillow, Truly, and others. I have not heard anything from the company about having to comply with NAR requirements. Your thoughts? All right. Well, we should not be selling. We do not have the proper licenses to be selling mobile homes on leased land, right? That is a vehicle, that is a car. We need a vehicle dealer's license. We do not have that. We should not be doing that. That is not that doesn't work. Now, again, if it's a co-op, meaning it's a co-op, then that's fine. There is real estate there, right? Even though it's owned by the co-op as opposed to that individual person, but then that individual person has shares in the co-op, that is fine. But selling mobile homes on leased lands, we are not licensed to do that. So we cannot do that. All right. Any buyer agency agreement signed prior to August 17th, we need to add the commission agreement, correct? All right. So a couple of questions here, I think. So once the data is out of the MLS, meaning there is no more commission data in the MLS, we need a commission agreement signed by the listing brokerage or the seller. If we have a buyer agency agreement signed prior to August 17th, we need to give that buyer that compensation disclosure, right? Letting them know things have changed, right? Pretty much now what they're saying is we have to let everybody know things have changed. Even, anybody we're working with, any listing we have, any past buyer agent agreement we have that's in effect, we need to tell them through this disclosure that things are operating differently. Hey, Sasha, does the seller pay directly to the buyer's broker or pay to the seller's agent's broker from the buyer agent pays by their broker? All right, so let's think of it like this. So if I'll use the example FSBO, right? FSBO doesn't have a listing brokerage, they're doing it themselves. They say, hey, bring me a buyer. You bring them a buyer, right? Just like now, would be no different than it is now. You need a commission agreement to make sure you get paid. Once the data is out of the MLS and you're working with a buyer, right? Even though, right, they have a listing brokerage, right? Then we need either something signed by the listing brokerage saying you're going to get paid or by the seller. Hey, Nizran, if a bonus is offered by a builder and the buyer commission agent doesn't include this commission, where does the bonus go? Does the builder just retain the bonus? Well, I mean, yes, the builder just retains the bonus, or through negotiation, maybe now they will sell that house to your buyer for $5,000 less if that was the bonus. Kelly says, oh, yeah, I mean, only name the counties you really do work in. If you end up going out of the surrounding counties, your service get another BBA or, amend the one you have. Does a seller's broker to buyer's broker commission agreement have to be executed before you sign it? Or can you sign it beforehand? Well, we can sign it beforehand if we're the listing brokerage. We're happy to do that. That way you have it, right, Marcia? And then when, the buyer says, hey, I'm putting in an offer, hey, here's what we're offering. It's all signed, right? If you're the buyer's agent, you want to get that, commission agreement prior to submitting the offer. You want to know, right? You want to be able to tell your client, here's what they're offering, right? When you sign that buyer broker agreement with them, you're going to tell them, hey, I'm going to work really hard to have the seller pay this, either through a concession or directly. So you don't have to pay. Susie says, hey, Susie, so it's my listing in my open house. Those buyers don't need to sign anything unless I take them out to see other properties. Or if they want to put an offer in on my listing. That is 100% correct. You nailed it. That is the answer. Good job. I've spoken to a lot of buyers that have no idea about the settlement. Is there a summary page to send them that explains why we have to ask to have a signed BBA? It's a good question. I think a lot of people don't know. I mean, we could send them to the NAR, frequently asked, website questions. I think one thing you could say, Sharon, is that through all this, it's to really, to increase transparency, in terms of who's paying what. Again, even though they're signing it, your goal is to, have the seller, pay your commission, which is still, obviously we know legal. And you're going to do that either through that, commission agreement or through that concession. And hopefully that explains it. Thank you, Jody. He's a really nice guy. Um, all right, Kirsten says, so wow, when my client can't afford my commission or does not want to pay commission, that we have to tell them he has to buy another house, even he's maybe in love. Where is the best interest for my client in this? Any suggestions on how to explain this to a client? Um, That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I mean, I think a way to explain it is that no one in this world works for free, right? And obviously in a, situation like that, you're going to try to be as understanding as humanly possible, in order to help him get into that house that, he loves. And, hopefully there's still, compensation for you to make it worth your while. Right? I mean, again, maybe it can be rolled into the loan through a concession, right? I mean, there's ways of ultimately doing it. So I think you gotta see, but ultimately, I mean, again, I didn't make the rules. I thought the old system, worked awesome, very fair. But, again, whatever happened, and it is what it is. And, I don't know what practices go on in Kansas City, Missouri, where, this all got decided. Sergi says he doesn't have to buy another house. He can make a choice, either buy this house and pay you out of pocket or look for another one. Yeah, or see if you can, again, like think of it like this, somebody's paying, right? At the end of the day, the buyer brings the money. So maybe, maybe the house is 400. Maybe the buyer's willing, they love it so much, they're willing to pay, 408, right? And, the seller's good at 400, but they're also good at 408 with an $8,000 concession. You got to negotiate. You got to work through this. You got to figure it out. And I think you will. Hey, Tangela, are you saying you must sign BB? Yeah, I mean, the agent can sign it. I can sign it. It just needs to be signed, right? The takeaway is that, we need the buyer broker agreement. Again, the buyer broker agreement, one of those three agreements is what we need. All right, Laura. Laura says, just to be clear, one last time. So if we have current listing agreements already signed and on the MLS, you are saying we also need to get a listing commission agreement signed from our seller for the listing and one for offering buyer commissions now before the 17th. All right. So here's what you need. So if you have a listing, right, we know August 17th is coming. If you have a listing, and I'm going to use just as an example, 5%, 2.5% to the buyer's agent. We have that listing, it's executed. You can send me a commission agreement that we can sign, right, saying we are going to pay 2.5% because we know we're getting the 2.5% from the seller. But what also you need to give to your seller, Laura, is that compensation disclosure. Telling your seller, right, hey, things have changed. I'm just letting you know. Commissions are negotiable, right? I don't have the thing up right in front of me, but that's the gist of it. That's what we need. I mean, I didn't think we were going to need that. They kind of sprung that on me today. Maybe I missed something. I don't think I did. I asked them 5 times, and now they come up and then, it pisses you off. I get mad, I mean, like, what are they doing? I don't want to blame, but again, they've had this settlement agreement for, 4.5 months. And, right before it's all starting, they don't even have all the forms done. Not good, but it is what it is. So you need a compensation disclosure, just a disclosure, right? It's like the buy, Dalton Wade, we have the buyer broker disclosure, right? We let them know, hey, we're not responsible for this, we're not responsible for that. Just a disclosure. Same with this. It's just a disclosure, letting that seller and anybody that we have a buyer broker agreement with know things have changed. Hey, I'm letting you know things have changed. We are working hard, Sharon, to get everything in there. I'm sure very shortly they will be all in there. We're waiting again on Florida Realtors, um, to finish everything. Like we don't have yet you know, um, that compensation disclosure. The new listing agreement form came out yesterday. I mean, so, but we are on top of it. We know we need to get that in there. Some are in there, and we will get them all in there, as soon as possible. Hey Joel, how you doing? This is a good one. Can we add commission notes in showing time? That's a stumper, Joel. That's a good one. I got to find out. I don't know. I think if you can do that, I'm thinking yes, right? I'm thinking yes. It's a third party. Let me find out. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely. I mean, if you get the if you get the showing request, right, and you have that commission agreement signed, you just send it over to them. Here it is. This is what we're offering. Maybe your client wants to offer on this property. Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't have to wait for them to ask you. Lars hit me with another stumper. What if a buyer says, I only want to see homes where the seller is going to pay the buyer's commission? Can we put that on the BBA and have them sign that part? I have to get back to you on that. I don't know that. I mean, I don't know. I would say no. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking through again, like the whole, I mean, I will check on that, but I'm thinking they're coming back and saying we can't do that, but I will find out on that. Jody's asking what is a fair time frame? 1, 3, 6 months to have them sign with us on the BBA. So again, depending on who they are, right? Like somebody that we're just meeting online, we don't really have any relationship with. I think shorter with them is better, right? Easier to get executed. Oh, you're just signing on with me for, 14 days, 1 month. Let's get to know each other. We're not really committing to each other. We're going on that first and second date, and then hopefully you fall in love with me, just like Anthony did, right? And then, you get them to sign something longer. Again, I think, agents that are sloppy don't do a great job, going to be harder. Great agents, strong agents, they're going to breeze through this. In fact, they are going to clean up your game, and you will do fine. Let's see how we're doing here. Second. All right, we'll go a few more minutes so we can get through some more of these. Let's see, we'll be able to send the lender our BBA agreement if the seller's not paying and the contract doesn't cover it, so that if the buyer doesn't have enough funds to pay us, the buyer agent, the loan won't close. Will that be on the settlement statement as well when we provide the title? Yeah, I mean, obviously, it definitely want it on the settlement statement. I mean, we don't want to go through. I think you can, send it over to the lender. I think some of the more finer points we just have to kind of see once we sort of get into this. As you're getting into it, right? Maybe that's a question that then we can, sort of see, hey, I sent this over to the lender. It doesn't seem now that my client qualifies. Again, maybe that isn't the house for them, right? Maybe they can't buy that house because they can't afford it. So Mike, never do that. I love you, Mike. Never do that. How do we do when offering and or requesting agents from other brokerage to host an open house? Oh, on their listing. So on their listing, yeah, again, I mean, so here's the policy. So the policy is nobody does a Dalton Wade open house unless it's a Dalton Wade agent. That to me is so weird, so strange, right? I can't even believe it. Like you think of it, the seller walks in, right? And they signed up with Dalton Wade, but then there's a guy from Keller Williams doing the open house. That makes absolutely no sense to me. So the policy is has to be a Dalton Wade agent. Now, again, if you, Mike, are very resourceful and, Keller Williams, Caldwell Banker, EXP, whoever lets you do their open house, fine, you can do that. If you're going to write an offer, right, that buyer wants to write an offer, you need a buyer broker agreement from them. If you take them out and you show them any houses, you need a buyer broker agreement. Is it good to put a retainer fee? If yes. Um, so here's the thing. You can put a retainer fee. Personally, I think you'll have difficulty getting anybody to sign it. Anybody to sign it. think of this, right? It's all negotiable. So Diana wants to get a retainer fee, but then Phil will work with you without a retainer fee. Who are they going to use? Who are they going to use? They're going to use me. I mean, you can see what the response is, you can see what the feedback is. But I think again, we're hoping to get people, to sign the buyer broker agreement. And now on top of it, we're trying to get a retainer out of them. Could be difficult. Well, one of the things that's difficult, Jody, is making people do things, right? You guys here tonight are all awesome. Really, I appreciate you being here. Makes me feel good, right? I mean, I don't have to worry because you're learning. Where's everybody else? Where's everybody else? It's hard. And as a 1099, like you can't really require somebody to take the training. It's hard to enforce, right? Eventually those people, they disappear. They disappear because they're not put together, right? They are, you know, they're just looking for a quick dollar. They watch too much HGTV, thought this was going to be easy, and it's not easy. And they fail. They fail. And we're going to see, I think, more failures, more people getting flushed out. So the good agents, there's going to be a bigger pool. It's hard, Jody. We try to do the trainings. We're here. We train on, we have open house training, lead every, you know, fairly flushed out, but sometimes it's a wide group of individuals. So we are trying, but it's difficult at some level to enforce. Yeah, I mean, again, I think, hey, Curtis, good to see you. I think if we're doing a Dalton Wade agent is doing an open house for another brokerage, that is fine by me. Again, if you're putting an offer in for that person who attended the open house, you need a buyer broker agreement, one of those three agreements, or and then if you're going to take them out and show them other houses, you need the buyer broker agreement. Let's see here. Hey, Jack, do we have to let the buyer know who is compensating the agent? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's either one or two ways. Either in essence, the seller or the listing brokerage is compensating, or the buyer is. So yeah, they need to know that. Hey, Carolyn, know your value so you can sell yourself. Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't be scared of this. Attack it. Go at it. Tell them you're great and then back it up. Hey, Steven, I'm off with the change. Now, if all the people want to truly be a realtor and want to help sellers or buyers, well, now you have to work for your commission and do your homework and actually work. I couldn't have said it better. This is where we separate the weak from the strong, the smart from the dummies, the true from the fake, and most of all, the giving from the takers. Just get the correct paperwork in order, and there should be no issues. I wish I would have wrote that because that's exactly how I feel. And that is so true. That is so true. Stanley says, I was told today that if the buyer agent asks the listing agent for the listing agreement, they must produce it to the buyer's agent for verification. I'm not sure about that, Stan. I'm not sure about that. That's like, why? Why does the buyer's agent need that? What business is of theirs? I was told the opposite. I was at least on, the buyer, like if you're the listing agent, I would think like, oh yeah, you want to see that buyer, that buyer broker agreement to make sure you know what, they've signed up for because they're getting the lesser, right, of what you're offering or what they agree to. And then, I did ask this specifically the legal hotline, and they said they're not required to give you that. A lot of these things are going to flush out once we get going. Good job. Good job, Carolyn. Yeah, maybe there's some other Dalton Wade agents you can help there. Yep. Let's see. Ingrid says, as a new agent, I'm glad I'm learning all this in a slower market. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Let's see. Tammy, how are you? One of my longtime agents, Tammy and Kelly. Thank you for explaining so much. I appreciate all you do. Good night. Thank you, Tammy. Have a great night. Let's see. Hey, Buana, what about new build compensation from the builder? It works just like it does everywhere else. I mean, again, you're only supposed to receive the max is what's on the, buyer broker agreement. Let's say the listing agent didn't, the new construction did pay you that bonus, and then, your buyer or the seller says, hey, I called the MLS on you, and now the MLS is asking you for that buyer broker agreement. And on that buyer broker agreement, it says 2%, but you collected more. You're in trouble. You're going to get fined. Can't do that, right? Honesty. We got to be honest. Can't do that. Good night, Minion. Thank you for being here. Good questions. Right. Vax Realtor has FAQ. Absolutely. Yeah, get comfortable with that buyer broker agreement, right? I mean, there's classes, there's webinars. I personally think it's better for us to pay the buyer's broker, Sergey, because here's the thing. What if the seller changes their mind and then doesn't do it? Meaning, even though they said they're going to do it, but then like when the offer comes in, oh no, well now, I'm not going to do that. Right. So I think it's better if we pay, because then we know, like, we have a contract, right? The other way, without it, we don't really have that. Absolutely. I agree, Laura. It's just been really, like, I mean, as I said, they've been, I don't know. It is what it is. And I just think they could have gotten a lot of this out a lot sooner and made it, it's right at the end, and they're just generating, first they said it was going to be June 15th, then June 30th. And what are they doing? I don't know. Unfortunately, I can't attend. I have a funeral tomorrow, Jody. Let's see. So just so you know, at a NAR settlement class from a FAR instructor, she was excited as she had just heard it was okay to write on the buyer broker agreement for those buyers who absolutely cannot afford my commission to write on that, the BBA to say only show homes. Yeah, we have to get back with everyone on that question, Susie. We will double check on that. There we go. Sounds like, we can do that. For Lisa, on the Florida Realtor webinar that we recently attended, the teacher said we could add a clause indicating the buyer does not want to see any homes, that compensation is not being offered. Sounds like a plan. Sounds like we can do that. Thank you, Jody. I need it. I think Danae, how are you? I mean, just to be safe, sign the buyer broker agreement. Sign it yourself, right? Obviously, you're going to do the disclosure, letting them know, you're an agent. So again, I mean, think of it all like always get the buyer one of those three things, right? Then you don't ever have to worry, no matter what it is. Maybe it's overkill, but you got it. Thank you, Sergey. That's exactly what I say. That's what we want to do. The new listing agreement. Hey, Patty, the new listing agreement is available. I think the transact. I mean, we had, I believe, like the single agent, and they were in Dotloop. We were looking for the transaction broker one. Hopefully, that's in there now. Let's see. Thank you, Laura. Hey, Tesla, good to hear from you. Thank you. There is a lot to learn, and obviously, we are all learning. And I think, and I don't want anybody to sort of lighten up here, but kind of what I'm hearing is there may be a little bit of a grace period, right? But once we get into, let's say we're at, and I don't know this for sure, but September 15th or whatever, right? I mean, MLS is, I'm sure they're struggling with all this. I know they are, right? So there's a lot, everybody asks questions, right? So, there'll be some clarification, but we just want to, do the best we can. So it is a lot. It's, there's a lot to digest. Thank you, Bella. Appreciate it. Yeah, if it's so, sir, yeah, if they can't change their mind, if it's in the listing agreement, then that's it. And then, the best way is, I believe, just to have, I kind of thought you meant, hey, it wasn't in the listing agreement. And then, they've decided to, offer compensation, but they wanted to kind of offer it like maybe on an individual basis. That's probably not as good. Hey, Carrie, how are you? Yeah, absolutely. You need a commission agreement. You need a commission agreement. Now, again, it's always better to be safe than sorry. Think of it like this. It's a great question. When the commission data was in the MLS, that's what guaranteed us getting paid. Right now, we put an offer in, they're offering 3%, and then we don't have anything now. We can't go and say, oh, it was in the MLS because it's not, right? And then they decide not to pay us. We are out of luck. So we always need that commission agreement. Always. Thank you, Susie. Appreciate it. Thank you, Steve. Enjoy. All right, guys. Appreciate everyone being here. Amaya, good to hear from you. Thank you. All right. Have a great night, guys. We'll be doing a few more of these as we kind of, refine some things. All right, everyone. Enjoy your evening. Have a great night. Thank you.